When Kim and Ron arrived at Gerald's old mansion, it looked almost a rundown shack. The mansion was tall, with pillars near the entrance, but the paint was fading and peeling. When the wood panels had rotted and fallen off in several areas, the old wooden roof was completely rotten and falling apart. The large lawn was dirt patch with tall weeds overgrowing it in several areas, and it was surrounded by an old rusty metal fence with a broken off gate that the door lay on the ground. Some of the windows were shattered and cracked, and the front of the doors were inward a bit. "This is it, Gerald's old mansion," Ron said as he opened the door and got out of his coupe. "Yeah, that at least it's not burnt down," Kim added as she got out and locked the coupe's doors. As they headed past the fallen gate and walked across the path of a cracked stepping stones, Rufus stirred nervously in Ron's pockets, fearing what may be waiting inside the mansion for all of them. Once they made it to the doors, Ron easily pushed it open and caused it to collapse to the floor inside due to years of rotting. Kim and Ron both entered the mansion, and they found it brightly lit due to them being no curtains anywhere near the windows. The mansion was mostly empty, devoid of furniture and other house items, except for the carpeting, which was torn and faded, and not to mention completely covered in dust and dirt. "This place is almost empty," Ron said, gazing at near the empty rooms around them. "I had a feeling that would be the case," Kim replied. "Let's not lose all hope, though. I'm sure there's something here we can find." To their left of the entrance was an enormous empty living room, the same one they saw on the evidence tapes a while ago. Most of the walls were cracked and the paint was faded from the years of neglect, but the fixtures were still intact. They wouldn't operate when Ron flipped the switches, however, which he and Kim were pretty much expected. "No power," Ron said. "Looks like we'll need to use our flashlights again for the dark rooms," Ron said, flickering on the switch. "I'm starting to think that this town has no power at all," Kim speculated. "The power station for this town has been probably rotted and broken down wherever it is. 10 years of neglect and weather damage probably destroyed the power generators." "Yeah, probably," Ron said, pulling his flashlight out of his suit pocket. "Hopefully we'll find out what went down here. And above it all, why was this town just abandoned like this?" "Ron, take a look at this over here," Kim said, running up to something around the corner. "What did you find?" Ron asked, rushing over to her. "I think I did," Kim replied, glancing at an old wooden door against the wall. "This looks like an entrance to the basement." Ron cringed upon reminding of Gerald's basement. It's where all the horrors inflicted on Sarah and Ridley took place. And for a moment he was afraid to see what they see down there. Of course, 10 years had passed since the town was populated, so Ron had no doubt that there would be anything alive in there, except for possibly rats and mice, since the house was rotted and old. "Looks like it to me," Ron said as he switched on the flashlight. "I'll have a look around down here." He pushed the door open, and the rusty hinges creaked and groaned as the door slowly opened, revealing a cement staircase leading down far into the mansion's basement. The staircase descended about 10 feet into a large rectangular basement that smelled moldy and musty, like a garage that has been flooded in water. When Ron touched down into the basement, he shined his light all over and got a better layout of the room around him. An old and rotted workbench lay cracked in half in the far end of the wall, which also had old rusty metal box sitting next to it. When Ron opened it, he found a pearl of anguish inside, which was rotted with rust, along with the assortment of different medieval torture weapons. Ron felt disgusted upon seeing them. He had no doubt that these were the same tools that Gerald would use on Sarah and Ridley whenever they resisted him, and this made Ron almost sick just thinking about it. Across the long wall to the right, there were old drain pipes that Ron guessed that they were for washing machine and dryer, and near the end of the basement, near the stairs, he saw an old rusty pair of chains hanging from the wall that cuffs onto the end. Ron already knew what these are, and he didn't even dare touch them. "Ron, you okay down there?" Kim called down to him from the top of the stairs. "Yeah," Ron replied. "Just some messed up stuff down there." "What did you find?" Kim asked. "Some old rusty torture weapons and rusty chains on the wall. The same ones that were used to restrain Sarah here in the basement," Ron answered. shining his light to the rest of the basement. There's an old security camera mounted on the wall too, or whatever was left of it. It's all broken up, and it seems to be... Ron suddenly heard a small L-shaped crack on the wall just above the busted workbench. He hadn't noticed it at first, but upon shining his light upon it, Ron noticed a faint gleam of the crack. There was something metal behind it. There's what, Ron? Kim asked in confusion. Hang on, I think I found something, Ron replied, approaching the wall. He reached up and placed his fingers on the crack, and then the wall suddenly crumbled away to reveal what looked like a metal safe built into the wall itself. The safe door was covered in rust and was sealed with a metal lock, which Ron easily broke off since it was practically rotted away with rust. Ron, what is it? Kim asked behind him. She had entered the room to see what Ron had found. Then her eyes found the safe. Looks like an old safe, Ron said. It was hidden behind the wall. It just crumbled just from me touching it. Why would there be a safe sealed over like that? Kim wondered. I don't know, Ron said, shining his light inside the safe. But if I had to guess, it's because Gerald was probably hiding something big that he didn't want anyone to see. That makes sense, Kim agreed. Is there anything in there? Ron looked inside, and what he found inside of the safe was actually a perfect condition, despite it being sealed in the wall for 10 years, possibly even longer. There was no dirt or rust to what looked like to be a video camera tapes with a large notebook that was surprisingly in good condition. Yeah, there's some videotapes in here and some old notebook, Ron replied, reaching in and pulling them out of the safe. That notebook's pretty big, Kim replied, taking it and checking it for the front cover. It's still in... No way! Kim, what is it? Ron asked. Ron, this isn't a notebook, just a notebook, Kim replied, flipping through the book around to show Ron the cover. It's a diary, and look whose name is on it. Ron gazed at the cover and saw the name Ridley Farkas, written in big red letters underneath the words, "This diary belongs to," making his eyes widen in surprise and excitement. Booyah! He cheered in delight. We just heard the jackpot, KP. This diary will tell us all we need to know about that psycho. And those tapes will be useful too, Kim replied. Should we check upstairs too? I doubt there will be anything useful up there, but it's worth a shot, Ron replied. Let's get out of this basement now. I think all we found we needed in there. Kim and Ron made their way back up to the stairs and shut the basement door. Once they reached up to the top, Ron's pocketed the video camera tapes and then took Ridley's diary from Kim to keep it safe. The two of them headed up the stairs and found it rather dark up there, but the red LED light flashlights easily lit the way. The hall was short and there were 3 doors on each side of it, and Kim could make out an ancient-looking security camera hanging from the ceiling at the other end that aimed at the stairs. The wires were poking out from the back, and the lens were cracked. It was clearly broken, one like in the basement, but Kim and Ron still felt a sense of paranoia with all these cameras around the mansion. But the first door onto the left was a completely old bathroom, which had been covered in cobwebs and dust. The lights didn't work, and the water appeared to be shut off as well. Even the toilet wouldn't flush, and the bowl was completely empty. The other 5 rooms were stripped clean of everything, except the carpeting, which was torn and damaged. The last room was Gerald's room, and as Kim and Ron knew this, remembering it from the FBI video they saw earlier, like the other rooms, it was completely stripped off of everything but the old carpets, and there was what happened to be an old bloodstain on the carpet in the center of Gerald's old room. This was the spot where Gerald was killed, Kim realized, upon seeing the stain on the old carpet. Yeah, not like anyone would care, though. He was a sick monster, Ron replied, looking around the room. Doesn't look like we'll find anything in here. It's all empty. I'm guessing the FBI cleaned this place out when they raided the place, all except that safe we found in the basement, since it was in behind the wall. That's my guess too, Kim replied. Let's just get out of here and we'll check out everything we found here in the car. Sounds like a plan, Ron agreed. That diary might tell us the last bit of Ridley's secrets. I doubt that will lead us to his hideout, though, Kim replied doubtfully. Yeah, Ron replied in a disappointed tone, but everything we find might give us an insight of how Ridley's mind works, and just what it makes him thick. I have no doubt about that, Kim nodded. Since Ridley clearly lied about destroying this place, I'm guessing the truth he was keeping that psych ward might be revealed in the diary. And the truth is probably going to be ugly, Ron speculated as they headed down the stairs. Anything involving Ridley is not going to be pleasant, Kim stated. The two of them exited as the old rotten mansion, and then he headed back towards the coop, wondering just how horrifying the secrets contained in those tapes and diaries are. Kim and Ron began checking out the videotapes on the dashboard of the communicator within the coop, wondering just why Gerald went through so much trouble to hide them in a safe hidden in the basement wall. Ron hadn't got a good look at the tapes since they had been in the dark, but upon seeing them in the light, they saw each of them were labeled like all the tapes they had found in the police station and the courthouse. The videotapes were labeled, "Getting rid of that bastard," and "Rise to my power." Ron felt these titles to be odd, but he didn't think much of it. "We should go with the videotapes first before checking the diary," Kim suggested. "My thoughts exactly," Ron agreed. He set the first tape into the communicator and began playing on the dashboard screen. The video opened up in what Kim and Ron recognized to be outside of Gerald's mansion. Only there wasn't anyone in sight. The quality was slightly better than the other horrid videos that they found in the abandoned police station, so the things weren't as fuzzy, even though it was clearly nighttime in the video. The voice of the cameraman was also very clear, and Kim and Ron had recognized it instantly. It was Ridley's voice. "My old man is finally asleep, and those sleeping pills my men snuck into the beers of his freaking lackeys earlier seem to be keeping them asleep. Finally, after so long, my old man and his goons are going to get what's coming to them," Ridley said in a hasteful voice. "I'm no longer a weakling like my old man thinks I am. I've got my old gang now, and they are stronger than hell. Even hell than the Mexicans are waiting to do business with us." He sounded so much different than what he did in that horrible video he did of Bonnie being held captive, which had given made sense since he was much younger. Ron recalled the reports saying that Ridley was 10, and he supposedly killed Gerald, but upon learning the whole thing that had been a lie, it was clear that Ridley had done such a deed at a much older age than 10. The camera shifted over to the front door leading into the mansion that Ridley slowly advanced towards it. The lights in the mansion seemed to be off, only because the source of light was the video appeared to be coming from a flashlight that had been attached to the camera. Once he had stopped near the door, the camera lowered towards a large leather bag that he held in his free hand. "That fat bastard's already been exposed by the FBI anyway, so I might as well have myself some fun before I flee this town," Ridley hissed. Kim and Ron watched as Ridley picked up the lock and made his way towards the mansion. It was dimly lit by the flashlight attached to the camera. Occasionally, the camera would just glance up at the vintage security cameras mounted on the walls, which appeared to be dark. "Good thing I cut the power to this place. Now I can avoid triggering those damn motion sensor alarms or being spotted on the cameras," Ridley muttered in the background. The camera then stared straight ahead and moved forward slowly, followed by the sound of fast footsteps. Ridley eventually stopped right outside of Gerald's room, and then the video went into static. "What the hell?" Ron exclaimed. "Is the tape damaged?" Kim questioned, checking the communicator. Before Ron could respond, the video came back up, and it revealed something very disturbing. The video showed of Gerald's hanging upside down by chains that had been mounted onto the ceiling, supposedly by Ridley. He had been stripped off his clothing, and Gerald had been gagged and his hands had been restrained with his metal cuffs. All he was wearing was his boxers, and he was struggling to get out of his bonds. Clearly enraged with Ridley of what he had done, just then a fist struck Gerald's head, causing his nose to bleed. I'm sorry. Did that hurt, old man?" Ridley taunted with an evil, sadistic voice. Gerald let out his muffled, angry yells in response. The tone of Ridley's voice in the background soon turned out into pure hatred. "Well, let me just tell you right now, it was nothing compared to what's coming to you next," Ridley snarled with his voice full of hate. "For pretty much my entire life, you used me as your little punchy bag whenever I messed up on something as simple, and you allowed your gang of boys to have your way with me as well. You kept me locked up in that rotting, stinking, pathetic basement, feeding me scraps like an animal, and making me do all your dirty work for 12 fucking years. Well, now you finally know my pain after all these years, but before we part ways for good, You want to know a little secret before I get rid of you? Gerald let out an angry, muffled yell in response. I'll take that as a yes. So, I guess I'll tell you, Ridley said. Then he leaned in the camera forward and made a whispering something towards Gerald. Your brother told me to get rid of you since the FBI pretty much exposed all the shit that you've been doing. Hell, I'm gonna have to make a run for it once I'm done with you, 'cause even though my uncle erased all records of my existence, I could still pretty much get caught once the state police and FBI start raiding the place. But it's not like you and your boy Lackneys will ever be alive to see it. And besides, I've started building my own empire, and while I was gone from this shithole, and it's several years, it's going to be far better than yours ever will be. Ridley then struck Gerald again, then kicked him in the chest. You took my mother away from me. You treated me like shit all my life, and you always put me through the absolute worst hell on earth whenever you felt like it. Thank God I managed to escape this place that night all those 10 years ago, but still went for the living hell in the ghetto. And all you because you used me as some slave for your demands. Ridley seethed with anger. He struck Gerald much harder this time, making him whimper. Stop your whining, you fat asswipe. You think that's painful? Well, I'm going to show you what truly pain is, Ridley snarled, spitting in Gerald's face. The camera spun around from Gerald as Ridley walked towards a tripod. Then the camera spun back around to face the fat kingpin from the ceiling fan. A clicking sound was then heard as Ridley locked the camera in place. Shuffling could be heard in the background, but Kim and Ron couldn't see what Ridley was doing. However, what Ridley was doing terrified Gerald because his expression turned that of one terror and fear. Ridley then stepped into the scene with a large gas-powdered chainsaw in his hands, and then this made the terrified crime boss struggle even further. I take it your expression that you know very well what this is, don't you? Ridley taunted, raising a sharp chained blade near Gerald's face. The fat crook shook his head, letting out what Kim and Ron could only make out as pleas of mercy. This is the same little toy you used on my mother all those years ago when she tried to escape from this hell of yours. Well, I'm guessing you never thought you'd be the end of this blade, didn't you? Ridley sneered sarcastically. Gerald let out a muffled yell in response, now struggling even more than ever. You know what got me thinking? Maybe my old man deserves to go out in style, and what better way to do that than to use the very same chainsaw he used on my poor, defenseless mother. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. That's what I'm thinking. Hey, old man? Ridley mocked in a taunting voice. Gerald had stopped struggling and now appeared to be shaking in fear and terror. Judging from your reaction, I think you agree with me, don't you? Well then, Ridley gripped at the starter cord and the chainsaw with an evil grin. Let's get this party started, shall we? He yanked from the starter cord and the chainsaw quickly roared to life. Gerald now began struggling and screaming behind his gag as Ridley raised the chainsaw above him. He then glanced at Gerald's flailing arms. You're really annoying me with all that flailing about, so why don't we lighten you up a little? Ridley sneered. Then he lowered the chainsaw towards Gerald's left shoulder. Kim and Ron had to look away as Ridley proceeded to butcher the crime boss like a piece of meat, cackling like the Joker himself. And as he did the deed, even gagged, Kim and Ron could hear Gerald's screams of agony over the roaring chainsaw. As Ridley hacked away at him, it was like a scene right out of a horror film. Luckily, they were spared from any other gruesome scenes, because the video suddenly went to static, like earlier for about 10 seconds. Then it came back on. Kim and Ron just glanced back at the screen, and they quickly wished that they hadn't. Gerald was now in the same state like he had been in that video, where the FBI raided the mansion and found him dead and butchered. Only the corpse wasn't decayed. Ridley had stepped back now into frame, now covered in blood. Good riddance to that asshole. His Lackneys were so much easier to deal with since they were asleep. But now I think it's time for me to blow this joint before the FBI arrives, Ridley said with a sneer, picking up the camera. Guess they'll have to clean up the mess themselves. Ridley then reached up to the camera and ripped it off the tripod. The video officially ended with the tape popped out of the communicator, leaving Kim and Ron stunned and disgusted. More pieces to the puzzle were now falling into place. It was clear that Ridley had somehow managed to escape from Gerald's mansion at a younger age, but ended up living in the slums of whatever city, having to fend for himself. At some point while living in the slums, Ridley had the formed Black Shadow organization, which started as a gang and then eventually rose to the power over time. Still, however, there were many things that didn't make sense. Ron had remembered reading those police files, dating Ridley's arrest, and all the crimes that had committed, and there was one big problem that came to mind. "Something's wrong here, KP," Ron said, tapped his chin. "What's wrong?" Kim asked. "Pretty much everything," Ron began. "Every little bit of evidence that we found in this town just doesn't seem to add up to the evidence that we found about Ridley and the Black Shadow on the dark web. Remember all those police files that he had his crimes and records and listing? Well, this doesn't add up. None of it does. We clearly know how Ridley never destroyed Gerald's mansion, and he was so much younger when he escaped. But what about after? That FBI investigation tape mentioned that Gerald was found dead in his home in the year 1999. It also happened to be the same year that Detective Lloyd Florence and his team busted Ridley and his gang for drug smuggling. But what I don't get this, why did those criminal records contradict every bit of evidence we found on Ridley in this town? It makes no sense." "I think it's very obvious by now, Ron," Kim replied. "Someone may have tampered with it to throw us off course. Most likely Ridley himself. But what if that were to be the case? Why would he just kill Gemini if the evidence on that flash drive were fake? It makes no sense at all," Ron said, even more confused. "If it was all fake, Ridley would have no need to kill him." "I don't think that's the reason," Kim objected. "Ridley had killed Gemini because he revealed the Black Shadow's existence to global justice. I doubt he learned everything about the flash drive." "So you're suggesting all that evidence we found on the dark web about Ridley were a lie?" Ron asked, feeling his blood running cold. "Maybe not all of it, but seeing some of the evidence we found in the dark wood, it's very clear that most of the info from that flash drive is fake. But the part stating the part of Ridley's arrest in 1999 appears to be accurate, but the rest of it is most likely fake," Kim theorized. "That's what I'm thinking too," Ron replied, grabbing another videotape. "The rest of these tapes in the diary could confirm our theories all on that." He then slid into the tape in the communicator, which labeled "My Rise to Power," then hit the play button. The video opened up with Ridley sitting in a throne-like chair in a small room behind a desk, dressed in a biker gang-style jacket and pants, with the black shirt underneath his jacket with the skull emblem that appeared to have a bloody tears running down his eyes with the crosswords through it. He had the iconic scars on his face now, which Kim and Ron guessed that might have been caused by the fights with the other gangs. To whoever is watching this, you're either a pathetic FBI agent who stumbled upon this videotape, or perhaps a member of my gang looking for my successor. Either way, it doesn't matter," Ridley began. "I'm recording this in hopes whoever finds this will one day learn my legacy and how I now rose power over this piece of shit father, Gerald Farkas. To consider this my life story, it's quite a long and pitiful one." Kim and Ron felt their hearts skip a beat upon realizing that they were about to hear Ridley tell his entire life story. They'd had to learn from the real story from Ridley Farkas himself. They were finally able to hear that. "Perhaps I should begin from the year I was born, and that was in 1974, in the town of Darkwood," Ridley stated. "I wasn't a normal child. My parents were never married. No, my mother was kidnapped by my disgusting bastard of a father when she was only 15 years old and locked up in his basement, and used to be some sort of pleasure toy. My old man had a thing for underage girls like my mother, and he just happened to be at the wrong place and the wrong time for her. My mother, Sarah, was headed to a home from school one day in 1973 when my father's group of gang members crept up with like an unmarked van and nabbed her so easily. She served one purpose after that, and that was to be my dad's plaything. But she was quite resistant. Because of all that, my mother's family paid the price for it. She tried escaping and going to the cops, but she had no idea that the cops were working for my old man, and they finally brought her back to the Farkas mansion. My bastard father had then removed my mother's legs with a chainsaw and torture her in ways that would make the most sane person lose their mind. And to add insult to injury, his men went over to their family's house and relatives' house, where they began simultaneously murdering them all. Ridley grew visibly upset and angry upon mentioning his story, clenching his fist as well. My old man then brought their heads back as trophies, which he then taxidermized them to keep them in the basement, to serve as a reminder to my mother to never defy him again, unless she wanted to see face the same fate. Ridley continued. Of course, thanks to those bastards' barbaric treatment of my mother and murder of the entire family, she had all lost any hope, and she wanted to accepted her fate. My old man got her pregnant with me a few months later, and once she gave birth to me in April of 1974, he allowed her to raise me as long as she acknowledged that he's in charge of my life once I grew old enough to understand the world around me. My mother had no choice but to accept this, and once I turned 4 years old in 1978, my father sold my mother off to a Mexican charterer for profit. I tried to stop him from taking my mother away, but my old man responded by beating me with a razor-wired whip as punishment for daring to try and rebel against him. Once my mother was gone, my life went to hell, literally. Ridley wiped what appeared to be tears from his face, but then he continued. My mother was the only one who was nice to me, but she could never defend me from my monster of a father whenever he beat me for simply stepping out of the line or for not doing what he wanted. I remember begging her to help me escape, but she told me not even to bother trying since the frickin' bastard, every cop working for him, and the mansion that had cameras and motion sensors everywhere, Ridley hissed, shedding more tears in anger and sorrow. My mother just said that I needed to do whatever he says and I'll survive it. It was clear that my mother had no hope of escape and already given up trying after her family was killed. She barely even resisted when my father and his men sold her to a sick-minded chartel boss since that he got tired of having her around. He also said that she kept holding me back from his teachings. Even throughout my years after my mother was gone, that old man kept me locked up in the basement and forcibly trained me how to be like him and his men, sending with them on heists and other criminal activities. I was only 4 years old when my father forced me to plant drugs in some random person's car. Apparently this person was bad-mouthing about him behind his back and wanted him gone. Ridley's story went on his way, and Kim and Ron listened to every last bit of it. Some of it was slightly accurate to the fake info that they had found on the flash drive, but most of it was completely different from what they had all believed in the truth at the time. Ridley was treated like a slave and a piece of meat, and only being kept around for the sole purpose of doing whatever criminal work Gerald wanted him to do. Even if Ridley failed to accomplish what he wanted to do, he could have been beaten and violated by Gerald and his men, then forced to do horrid things that a child should never do. Him and Ron actually had to skip most of the parts since Ridley went to full-on detail on what exactly they did to him. It was horrible and graphic, and there were moments where Ridley punched the top of his desk in pure rage, remembering his painful, hellish past. Unlike his mother, Ridley had been planning for a way to escape and try to escape the clutches of his father. But it was impossible since Gerald had always kept his men a close eye on him whenever he was sent out on missions. If he tried to escape or run away, Gerald's men would kill him as punishment. Due to the mansion having security cameras and motion sensor alarms in every single room, including the bathrooms, and even outside, where armed guards were constantly watching the doors, there was no way Ridley could just run away at night. Because of this, he had to bide all this time and figured out a way to escape once the time was right. But this wouldn't happen until he was 12 years old. For 8 years, Ridley was forced to do Gerald's bedding thing, and even all the torture and the abuse that he had received at the hands of Gerald and his man warped a very view of reality. Ridley began to hate everyone around him due to the hell his father put him through. In Ridley's mind, he didn't deserve to be happy, if he couldn't be happy. They all could never understand misery unless they felt it for themselves, and that was when Ridley was on the path of becoming the most powerful and dangerous crime bosses in history since the AI Capitone. When Ridley turned 12 years old in 1986, he had managed to gain enough trust from his father to go out on gang heist missions alone, and that's when he formed a plan to escape the clutches of his father once and for all. During the summer of June 1986, Ridley was sent out to do a drug delivery to a group of Gerald's cops that were patrolling the exit and the entrance of the town of Darkwood. And once there, Ridley had snuck a pipe bomb inside a suitcase containing the drugs delivered to the corrupted cops. Once he got far enough away, he set off the bomb and killed 2 of the officers, allowing him to escape the town of Darkwood from his father for good. Ridley had ran as far as he could, never looking far away as he set the bomb off and killed the 2 officers. But eventually he arrived in Middleton City 2 days after wandering on foot. From there he turned to a life of crime and survive, and vowed to one day build his own criminal organization and make it far better and stronger than his father's organization. For the next 5 years, Ridley lived underneath the city in an abandoned subway tunnel, stealing and robbing just to survive. He didn't want to risk Gerald and his men finding his location and returning him back to the hellhole of his mansion, where he'd probably be killed for betraying him. Because of this, Ridley would mostly rob places at night to avoid detection, starting out with gas stations, then moving up to various thrift stores and jewelry stores. His experience with Gerald and his gang allowed him to easily avoid being caught, and he learned how to disable security camera systems and burglar alarm systems. However, Ridley's luck eventually ran out at age 13, and the cops arrested him after an off-duty officer caught him tampering with the security system of the jewelry store, and he was locked up in jail for his crime. Not wanting to reveal his last name to the cops due to fear of his father finding him, taking him back to Darkwood, where he'd no doubt be killed, Ridley lied and stated that he had been abandoned by his parents as a kid and had been living on the streets ever since. He then gave his first name, but stated that he didn't know who his parents were, and took it with a deception, but eventually by the Middleton police fell for Ridley's lies and deception. However, he ended up being sent to juvenile hall for the next 18 months for theft and tampering with expensive security cameras. Once he was released, Ridley was sent to some kind-hearted host family through foster care system. But all the years of abuse from his father was hardened on his heart, to the point even their kindness wouldn't sheer him away from the path of evil he was already on. Ridley did everything he could to make the lives of his family so innocent and miserable. For his mind, he didn't know what true suffering really was unless they experienced it for themselves. He'd steal from his host parents, sexually harass 2 of their under-teenage daughters, and also blackmail them by threatening to kill them if they dare to speak about it. At his new school, Ridley met Lloyd Florence for the first time, who was only 10 years old at the time. Immediately, Lloyd became his prime target for bullying, and he was surprisingly very resistant towards Ridley's threats and violence of harassment. Lloyd, who also seemed to have a thing for protecting younger students from Ridley and his bullying, he went as far as to threaten him by letting the principal know that if he didn't leave him alone. This caused Ridley to develop a deep contempt for Lloyd, and it would only grow as time progressed.